Sevagoth is finally here, and this is really just quite the Warframe. Able to do really just not fair amounts of damage at pretty much all levels of enemy content, able to survive against, again, pretty much all levels of enemies. The more enemies, the better, making him ideal for Steel Path. This Warframe is excellent for pretty much everything, be it high enemy count, survivals against high level enemies, or even going to something as simple as spy missions. Sevagoth has some very nice things to offer for pretty much every single mission type. Now, that being said, Sevagoth is what I would consider a bit of an endgame Warframe, only in the sense that it requires quite a lot of investment to really get Sevagoth powered up to his maximum. I'm talking like 10 Forma total across both Sevagoth and his Exalted Shadow, plus I guess even his Exalted Melee as well, which is where the vast majority of the Forma are going. The frame doesn't need that much Forma, of course, but if you have all that Forma laying around, this is an essentially infinitely scaling Warframe that can be very useful in pretty much every single game type, except for maybe some more particular nuanced things like Eidolon hunts or Prophet Taker or other certain types of assassinations. Maybe other frames would be better, but for generalized content, pretty much anything on the star chart, Sevagoth is an excellent choice. So we'll go ahead and just do a brief synopsis of his abilities at baseline, and then we'll go through builds, helmet choices, and things that I like to do to make the Warframe perform to my particular tastes. Your first ability is called Reap. You shoot out this shadow that will basically track your crosshair, and it will go pretty much wherever you want it to, as long as you keep directing it with the crosshair. It will not hit enemies more than once, unfortunately, so you can't just like have it do circles around an enemy and strike them over and over. But still, hitting an entire group with this ability, if you want to, is something that you absolutely can do. You'll see all these enemies have this weird, like, ethereal flame effect coming out of them after being struck by this. They are being debuffed so that they take significantly more damage from all sources once they are struck by that ability. In my particular build, we're looking at a 90% damage vulnerability. However, you can go much higher if you really go deep into power strength. This ability by itself does not do very much damage. However, when you combine it with your 2, called So, you start having some interesting effects. If you first activate your 2 and plant a Death Seed in all enemies, dealing a small damage over time, and then you press 1 on them, watch the health bar. You see that there is basically a percentage of an enemy's health that is being dealt in a radius around them. So essentially what you can do is kind of like the whole meme of this character from DE is to reap what you sow. So you cast Sow on a group of enemies and then reap them over and over and over to get percentage-based damage that is effectively infinitely scaling onto all of these enemies. And that's kind of the whole meme of this, right? And you can cast one really quickly, but even so, against these level enemies, the damage is just, quite frankly, not there. And even against lower level enemies, I still find the damage to be a bit lacking. So we'll go ahead and switch over to those just to kind of show what I mean. So let's go ahead and switch these enemies to level 40. We'll do level 40 heavy gunners, and we'll do the same thing. We will Sow, reap. It's a little better against these lower level enemies, yes. But these are still, again, level 40 enemies. They're gonna die really quickly regardless. So this is kind of supposed to be, at least how I interpreted the marketing, is kind of like this infinitely scaling percentage of health-based damage, synergy combo, whatever you want to call it, that doesn't seem to scale super well to Steel Path levels. Which is totally fine, don't get me wrong. Like, not everything has to easy clap destroy Steel Path content. I'm just saying that if you're not playing that level of content, then it doesn't really matter what you do with the build anyways, because the frame is going to be super, super strong regardless. But if you want to get the absolute max out of the build for this Warframe, or like just have it so the frame is so absurdly strong that you really never have to think or worry about what kind of content it is that you're doing, and the frame just always works well for you, then some of the changes and suggestions I'm going to suggest to you in just a little bit will, of course, be the way to go. To keep things quick, we'll go through the other abilities very quickly. Your third ability is called Gloom. You have this AoE around you that expands over time up to a maximum radius, and every enemy that is within here will be slowed down by a percentage that is based upon your power strength. My current amount of slowing on my current build is in the mid-60s of percentage, which is more than enough. That is plenty of slow on enemies that are in a radius around you. And it does a really good job at keeping you alive against really large numbers of enemies like this. So we'll keep them all slowed. Yes, I'm getting knocked down over and over, but we can watch my health bar once it actually starts to go down. It's not that quick, right? I have plenty of time to react to damage that I am taking, to either activate my operator mode to heal myself. I can kill enemies, and enemies that die within this AoE will give me all my health back. So Sevagoth is a Warframe that, if you are being even a little bit active, is incredibly hard to actually kill. Now, your fourth ability, of course, your Exalted form, your Exalted weapon, Sevagoth's Shadow. Your 1 will pull enemies into you. Your 3, Death's Harvest, will make them much more susceptible to damage. Just like Sevagoth's 1 in his normal form, Sevagoth's Shadow does the same exact thing in their 3, except instead of it being a line-based ability, it is an AoE around the shadow. Go ahead and max these enemies out, spawn them. Very simply, we just group them up, press 3, and you win the video game. Like, level 165 Corrupted Heavy Gunners die instantly to the melee attacks of this Exalted form. You don't even need all the ridiculous amount of Forma that I have in it to do what I'm doing there. So the damage on Exalted form effectively scales infinitely against your typical routine enemies. So again, if you're doing Kuva survivals, if you're doing Mott on Steel Path to try to farm Argon, or whatever other like routine star chart farms you're trying to do, particularly survivals, but again, other missions are great as well for this frame, you never have to worry while playing as this Warframe. The other really good thing to note is that when you switch into Sevagoth Shadow, which of course I can't do right now because I don't have my passive ability, the Death Well, filled up all the way, so let's just go ahead and fill that up. The other really cool thing is that Sevagoth's Gloom, your 3, will still be channeled by Sevagoth while you are in the Shadow form. So this means that you're basically buffing your own Shadow and giving it a slow radius to keep it more survivable and to give it some healing, so that way your Shadow can stay alive for longer should you really want it to. Now, my argument is going to be, in a little bit here as we get to it, that you kind of don't care at all how survivable your Shadow is, and that is going to come into effect with the builds I'm going to be showing you. By the way, Sevagoth's Shadow, their 2 is mostly useless, to be completely frank with you. It is a dash, and if you hit an enemy, you will deal damage to them and heal the Shadow form off of that. But honestly, you could just press 4 twice, which is to leave the Shadow form and then re-enter the Shadow form, and it's going to respawn with all of its health anyways, so why you would ever bother to press 2 is I'm not entirely clear to me, to be honest. I understand the meme of Sevagoth's 2 and how it interacts with Sevagoth's passive, which is when Sevagoth dies, he will change into Shadow form, and then if the Shadow form presses 2 on 5 enemies, Sevagoth will respawn without using a revive. Like, that's kind of a cool little meme mechanic, but in actuality, I don't think there's ever a reason in like a real mission scenario where you're going to actually use Sevagoth's Shadows too. And by the same token, as we were already kind of ripping on Sevagoth's natural 2. So we're going to go ahead and replace it with something better. And this is, of course, very incredibly boring, because literally every Warframe gets better with Breeze Surge for the most part. But I think Sevagoth is still a pretty solid example of Breeze Surge kind of just doing a better thing than what So would do. So the entire point of casting So, at least in my opinion, was to basically give Sevagoth some form of infinitely scaling damage that will help him in super high level missions, like maybe your 3rd sortie where enemies are at level 100 plus, or just Steel Path stuff in general. So your 2 is supposed to be your infinite scaling, right? Well, sure, it's like your 2 enables your 1 to be infinitely scaling, but if I just press 2 here, and then I do the 1 stuff all the same, I'm still going to send out a lot of damage to enemies all around me, and I'm still killing stuff really slowly, right? Just like I would be anyways by doing 2 plus 1. Except this time, I'm spreading radiation everywhere. So I'm getting extra status procs on enemies, which means condition overload on myself and my allies is going to be that much better. Plus the radiation procs mean fewer enemies will be attacking me personally. Plus they're all going to be blinded anyways, so blinding enemies in an AoE around me, plus adding radiation procs to them, plus the slow from Gloom, means that I'm really not going to die. I thought I unpaused these guys. Whoopsies. Let me go make sure that they're unpaused. Let's kill, unpause, exit, re-enter, simulate. Okay. So we'll go in, hit 2, hit 1. These enemies all have weakness on them. They're all attacking each other, not me. I can just freely just take my time to kill them now. It's pretty not fair, honestly. So now, with all this said, Sevagoth is basically, with the way that we have constructed him, invincible. All we have to do, 3, 2, 1. Operator if we need to. Kill some stuff. Respread our 1. Kill some stuff. Fill the death well. Death well's filled. Enemies are almost dead. Please die. Thank you. Please die. Thank you. Now, let's say we're in our survival. Next wave of enemies spawns. Already have our stuff ready. Breach Surge. Press 4. Now we're in shadow form. Group them up. Make them weak. Bop, 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 bop. Switch back. Cast a 2. Cast a 4. Bop, 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 bop. Switch out. Cast a 2. Cast a 4. You get it? Like, we're just going back and forth, and we can constantly be switching forms. And because there is no energy cost or deathwell cost of constantly switching forms, it's really hard to kill Sevagoth. Even if your passive activates and you have the Shadow active and you have to do the whole minigame meme with Shadow, that's fine. The frame actually dying basically doesn't happen. So now let's go ahead, we'll take a look at the build as I have it set up. You could invest even further than I have, but we'll show just what I've gotten to this point that is already plenty strong. And then we'll do a little bit of gameplay at the very end as well. So for Sevagoth, here is what I have done so far. I have put in 2 Forma. Sevagoth kind of unfortunately comes with a D polarity by default and no aura polarity. So it's a little rough. It's really awkward to use Umbral Vitality plus Umbral Intensify on this build and still being able to fill every single slot unless you basically Forma the D polarity and change it to something else, which you absolutely can do. But just to me, it kind of felt bad to do that. I just didn't really want to give up that polarity, even though it was probably objectively the right thing to do. So you kind of do what you want here, but regular Vitality still gives plenty of health and The fact that I'm able to just shove Power Drift in here at 7 cost means that really I don't actually care about this 10% ability strength. It's just something to shove in there for fun. You can replace Power Drift with literally anything that you want. If Sevagoth were to ever have a really cool augment or another helmet ability strikes your fancy, instead of Breach Surge, you could stick an augment for that in here, and that could be really, really cool. But this is just the nice balance between making Sevagoth's abilities do what I want and personal comfort, at least for me. So, what we have here, Fleeting Expertise for efficiency and then minus duration. That will make it so channeling our Gloom is a little bit easier, especially when combined with Prime Continuity, because when you have channeled abilities, they generally tend to scale off both duration and efficiency. If you have positive efficiency and positive duration, then you're usually looking like a pretty good channeled ability frame. We're sitting at 95% duration here, which is fine. Under 60% efficiency, which is fine. I very rarely have energy issues with this, as well as Arcane Energize on both Sevagoth and on Sevagoth's Shadow. But you can play around with this to your taste if you want to. Primed Flow is, of course, on here because, again, we are a channeling-based Warframe, and we have Arcane Energize. We want our energy to be able to overfill pretty much as we reasonably can to get the max possible value out of Energize and to make sure that we do not accidentally drop our 3 and then subsequently die. Apart from that, we don't care all that much about ability strength on Sevagoth. We want some to make the slow, like, pretty good. 60% slow is very strong. You can go even higher than 62% slow if you wanted to. You could put more strength if you wanted to. That would also give your Exalted Shadow more base damage. But sitting at about 175% strength feels plenty strong enough to me. And I think if I lost a little bit of strength off of Sevagoth, I wouldn't care all that much. Like, the extra strength on the Breach Surge for the extra status chance and damage multiplier off the motes is, of course, good. But even at negative power strengths, Breach Surge is still going to give you that infinitely scaling damage for the most part. So your strength value doesn't matter too much here. Just giving opponents a damage vulnerability of some kind with Reap, and giving enemies a slow of some kind with Gloom is good enough. Now, the range here is kind of middling. I didn't want to go too much into range. The reason being is that if you start giving Gloom too much range and too much radius, as well as a lot of strength, you get this really awkward scenario where you have enemies that are approaching you from all different areas of the circle, and they're all being really slow to really far away from Sevagoth, and it forces you to run around even more to chase enemies down, and it just kind of eliminates the whole point of the slow, where enemies can just congregate onto Sevagoth and just kind of be stuck in that bubble around Sevagoth. So, in my opinion, you don't want to go too much into negative range, but just a slightly above baseline range, just stretch and nothing else, is a nice little happy medium where you have a good AoE that Sevagoth and Sevagoth's Shadow can play around inside, as well as other teammates as well if you are not playing in solo mode. But it's not so large as to become unwieldy, because it absolutely can become awkward when you make the range ridiculously big. Plus, in addition, when you make the range really turbo large, more enemies are going to be affected by the ability at the same time, which means your efficiency effectively is going to drop by a lot. So there is a push and pull. There is kind of a give and take with Gloom here. You don't want it to be too big. You don't want it to be too small. Just a single stretch and nothing else for range seems just right to me, but your mileage may vary. Apart from that, Power Drift and Augur Secrets, again, these are kind of just whatever mods. You can drop both of these if you wanted to. You could drop one of these if you wanted to and put something better in there. You could put more Forma and make the frame do something interesting if you really wanted. Like, you could go into a set mod and start doing memes with some set mods. That could be really interesting. Just for this baseline kind of build here, we're not going too deep into that idea or that concept, but it is something that if you wanted to go further with this build, you could do. Next up, we have Sevagoth's Shadow. The build here, I think, is really cool. So we're going for basically just a full-out blind rage because I do not care about my efficiency whatsoever. Whenever you switch into Sevagoth's shadow from Sevagoth himself, you will be basically respawning the shadow. So you get all of your normal starting energy, which is why we have preparation on here, as well as prime flow. So that means I'm going to have an energy pool of 425 at maximum. So I'm going to spawn in with 82% of that, which I'm not going to do math live here, but that's a lot of energy. So I don't care about my efficiency because all I'm going to do is like pull, like press 1, 1, 1, and then I'll press 3 to make all the enemies pulled up on me weak. And then I will just yeet them with my melee weapon, and I will switch back into Sevagoth. I will reposition, I will reset Breach Surge, and then I will just do that over and over and over. So I don't care about efficiency, I don't care about max health, because I am not staying in the shadow form for very long. I'm just going to switch in, abuse preparation with low efficiency to cast a bunch of abilities, and then I go right back into Sevagoth's normal form. Your arcanes here, I think the only one that's really important is Energize. Reason being is that as you pick up energy orbs in Sevagoth's shadow form, the AoE splash of the energy regen will also hit Sevagoth himself, which means, well, you're going to keep Gloom up for pretty much infinite amounts of time, even if you are not actually piloting your Sevagoth. If you decided you did want to stay in shadow form for very long periods of time, you can just keep the Gloom up pretty much indefinitely thanks to all of that energy off of Energize. So this is the basic idea here. Natural Talent, I think, is the most replaceable mod on this. I think Mobilize is very, very important just to keep Sevagoth's Shadow moving with a pretty good amount of speed. Basically, the shadow just feels very slow. It might just be because of the different camera angle or how big the shadow is, but it just feels slow to me. So having Mobilize on there feels very nice just to keep things a little bit snappier. But Natural Talent and Mobilize are both very replaceable if you wanted to do so. I have a lot of range on this thing because I want Death's Harvest to hit as many enemies as it can. I want Embrace to pull as many enemies as it can. And I do not care about duration because, well, enemies die so fast to this form that I don't care if my debuff from my 3 only lasts for 8 seconds. I'm not even going to be spending 8 seconds in this form anyways. So it just doesn't matter. You can dumpster your duration even more. Like this is the only transient fortitude I have, so I don't have it maxed out. If you have more of these and you have a maxed out one, then like, by God, just stick it on there because like more strength means more vulnerability, less duration, you don't care, less efficiency, you don't care, just range and strength on this bad boy and go to town with people, and like it's pretty not fair how much damage you deal. The least interesting and also most expensive part of this build would be Sevagoth's Shadow Claws. This is just a very basic, simple build, condition overload to take advantage of those radiation procs I'm getting on enemies, plus my 52% status chance with IPS, heat, and viral all on here. I mean, you're going to be hitting enemies with an absurd amount of status effects, and you're going to be scaling off of them very, very, very nicely. Plus, you have Steel Charge on Sevagoth's Shadow to give you some baseline melee damage, so even before condition overload starts proccing, you have Steel Charge to give you a little bit of base damage. I stuck Arcane Fury on here to give myself a little bit more base damage. So 60 plus 90 is 150% base damage. That's basically a primed pressure point at that point. So the base damage is there. And then we have Condition Overload to just scale ridiculously off of that. Now, one thing you might be thinking is, why don't we put, what's that? What are those? Is it Vigilante? No, it is, what's that other set mod? Gladiator. You might be thinking, why don't we put the Gladiator set mods on here to get critical chance per combo multiplier? Because we can't use Blood Rush and things like that. What I have found personally through some pretty basic testing is that it seems as though the set mod effects do not apply to Sevagoth's Claws. I don't know if this is just a universal truth of Exalted Weapons, or if this is just a bug, or what is going on here, but from what I've found, even if I basically fill up Sevagoth and Sevagoth's Shadow with Gladiator mods, and I fill up the Shadow Claws with Gladiator mods, I do not notice a difference in my in which kinds of crits I'm getting. Like, I don't find that I'm getting more orange crits or that I'm getting all red crits. I find that it's still a mix of yellow and orange crits all the same. So as far as I can tell, the set bonus does not work. So therefore, there is no sense in even using the Gladiator set. So this is just what we have gone for. Berserker is only rank 1. You don't need any investment into the Berserker mod because your maximum of 75% extra attack speed remains the same regardless. And with the Shadow Claws and with a full follow through like this, you're going to be hitting so many enemies so quickly all at the same time that you're going to instantly go from 0% to plus 75 in 1 to 2 swings of your claws regardless. You do not need a maxed out Berserker. It barely makes a difference. If you want to put a 6th Forma into this or put an Umbra Forma into this to make that fit, feel free. Otherwise, just maximum primed reach, viral heat, condition overload, crit. This is your typical build for pretty much every single melee weapon in the game, and it does a billion damage. So now, we'll do a quick 5-minute survival here on Mott. This is, I guess, not the #1 best community-approved, try-hard-approved testing place, but this is like a real-world example of something you're going to actually be doing when, say, you need, oh, I don't know, Argon crystals. Steel Path Survival here is a really good way to do all that. And we'll just go through just the basic pattern here. So we fill the Death Well, cast a 1, cast a 2, cast a 4, cast a 1, oopsies, a 3, kill stuff, cast a 1, kill stuff, and just go back and forth. Cast a 2, cast a 1, cast a 4, bop, 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 bop. Enemies are so slowed and ragdolled and irradiated that they can't do stuff. They just can't do things. And we can just keep on switching between forms, back and forth and back and forth. What I would really, really love is if we could have that Equinox augment that makes it when you switch between Equinox forms that the other one breaks free. You know that augment? I wish I could put that on Sevagoth. That would be so cool. If I could just have Sevagoth's Shadow break free for a little while and while I pilot the real Sevagoth, and then I switch forms. We just go back and forth and back and forth. That sounds like a really good time, especially for solo play. But unfortunately, such things are illegal. So we can't do that. But yeah, this damage is not fair. And even if I start taking damage on Sevagoth, or rather on the Shadow, barely matters. Because when it dies, I'm not punished. My Death Well is still completely full, and I just go right back in to Sevagoth's Shadow. See, I can cast my 3 over and over. Like, doesn't do anything, but see, I can just like drain my energy, then I go right back into Death Well, and oh look, it's filled up again. So it doesn't matter if your Shadow dies. It doesn't mean anything. All it means is that you go back to Sevagoth form, and you have an excuse to cast your 2, which is Breach Surge now.
Life support incoming.
Like, you could shoot guns. But why? We'll just use abilities and melee stuff. This is a really cool playstyle. Like, if you just don't want to, if you don't want to shoot stuff all that much, just do this. It's very rewarding, very satisfying. We just keep breaking free over and over and over. And if my Death Well ever falls enough that I can't summon the Shadow right away, well, big group of enemies around me are all getting blinded. I just cast my one time, kill some enemies, refill the death wall that last little bit, and voila. Back to shadow form. You'll find that doors like this are the biggest bane of your existence, because as soon as you pull enemies, the door, like, forgets they exist. And they don't actually go through it. It's the same with, like, larvae. Very frustrating. See, like that. Oh, they killed me. Who cares? 3! You know, like... It's Sevagoth. This is just what he does. Oh, I died? Who cares? 2-4. Bop, 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 bop. Pair this with Mr. John Romero, the Vulpaphyla that spreads viral for me and doesn't die ever. We make a good team. I don't see that shadow underneath me. Is my thing still up? Oh, it is. Weird. Maybe I was out of the range. Whatever. Who cares? Breach Surge. Let's just smash one. Why not? Did I fill the death well? We did it. We're such good gamers. But yeah, this is Sevagoth. He's really good. He is worth the investment if you have the Forma laying around and you're like a mastery rank 1 billion and you're just looking for something new and cool to do. He's fun. He was worth the time, at least for me. I'm not gonna, you know, go much longer on this survival, but you get the point. Pretty cool. Other uses for Sevagoth are, of course, things like spy missions or defense missions or mobile defense missions. I really like him for spy, actually, because if you just keep the 3 active, you keep all the enemies inside the spy vault slowed to basically nothing. So even if they detect you, they're not going to press the button to sound the alarm. So as long as you take your time to not trip any laser wires or whatever. Like, Sevagoth is great for spy missions as well, so... Really, just Gloom is a great ability. And everything Sevagoth does is good. You should play Sevagoth. I hope you're inspired to try this frame out. If you have other ideas or suggestions for interesting Sevagoth builds, let me know. I'd love to hear what you have for them. Thanks for your time. Have a good one. Take care.